That just blows me away. Doesn't it you? And it said the number of kids in District 51, our local school district, that qualify for free or reduced free lunches, or free or reduced fee lunches, has grown from 38% in 2008 to now in 2011, it's increased to 45%. So that means literally almost half of the kids in our school district are in need of the reduced fee lunches. So I met these two folks that I've gotten to know in the coffee shop that I won't mention, call our Legacy. It's a great place to buy coffee. And these two guys work for a cable company. It's a guy and a woman. And so they're out in the community every day. So I say, hey, you guys, I just want to ask your opinion. As you drive around the community, are you seeing an increase of poverty? And they said, oh, yeah. I mean, without any hesitation, they said, it is so obvious to them that you see people that are living in squalid kind of conditions that they just didn't see before 2008. And they said you just see much more people on the streets asking for food. And there's houses everywhere that are, in bankruptcy and are empty, and they said it is so obvious to them that things have gotten worse here. So as I say these kind of things, I think there's a very typical response. There's a whole continuum of responses that we can have in a group like this. One group of us, we may think, why keep talking about these social issues? Leave the government to take care of those problems. We're here for church. Why don't you just preach the word? Let's just study the Bible, and that's what you're supposed to do, Kirk. And I get those kind of comments. There are others that you study this and you hear about this, and it's kind of the paralysis of analysis. You look at all the issues, the social issues, and it grows to the point that it becomes overwhelming to you, and so you just literally become paralyzed. You don't know where to start. You think, man, I'm just one drop of water in a whole ocean. What can I do to help? Some of us we're just apathetic, really, if we're really honest, that you really haven't considered it. You go on with your life, and you're living large, and you're just kind of doing your thing, and you really don't think about these things. And some of us, when we see those commercials of the starving, hungry people in the world, you change the channel. You don't want to hear it. We just bury your head in the sand and think the world's going to go by because it doesn't impact us personally. But the reality is it does. And there are others that you're very empathic, that when we talk about the poor, when we talk about the hungry, there's some of you that it just brings tears to your eyes, that you may have experienced hunger yourself at some point. Maybe you're experiencing it now. And so this is something that's very real. And it's something that you, in your life, have been doing what you can to help them. And God bless you if that's you. But what can we do? I think it's really important before we go into what we should do, that we have to look at this foundationally as truly a biblical issue. I think this is something that is a part of God's heart. One of the 5 Vineyard values that we have is compassionate ministry. And so our mission as a church is to encounter God. As you come and we encounter God's presence, and we grow in understanding of His Word and His life within us. And then we live in community in small groups, and we encounter others. But God is calling us to that third leg of the stool, that we're called on and we're sent out to encounter the world. And one of the best ways to encounter the world is to care for the poor, because it's God's heart. See, this is what's so important for us to see. This is not some kind of, we're just kind of a socialist-minded kind of a church. No, this is a biblical church. And it's a biblical church. God reveals to us His heart. And so Isaiah 58 is one of the classic examples of God's heart for the oppressed and for the marginalized. And in Isaiah 58, just to give you a little background, Isaiah 58 was written when Israel came out of exile in Babylon, and they came back to Israel, and they're rebuilding. Now, one of the things that happens when we lived in an impoverished kind of thing, like, do you remember what it was like in college? I mean, I was dirt poor in college. And it's good to remind ourselves of what it was like that you're living off of ramen. And you just dream of going to McDonald's to get a Big Mac. And then all of a sudden you get a job and you start getting a paycheck and all of a sudden you start having this excess money and some are thinking, yeah, right, Kirk. But anyway, when we are living where our needs are being met, it's really easy for us to forget what it's like to literally be poor and hungry. And so this is what is kind of the backdrop to Isaiah 58. And what God is doing, he's really confronting the religious mindset of the Israeli people. Because one of the things that happens is we can get real comfortable and smug in being, quote unquote, religious. And, you're thinking, well, I actually went to church 2 times this month instead of 1. And you know what? I'm cussing only 9 times a day instead of 20. And, we just think I'm smoking like 1 cigarette an hour instead of 4. And, we just think of these things that it's all external of how we're working at being more religious. And I read my Bible like actually more than once a month. And I'm actually trying to start to read it every day. And I'm doing my obligatory prayer. And God must really like me. I'm really becoming spiritual. But what Isaiah 58 is talking about is what true religion is. And he's speaking to Israel, and he's confronting to them that you guys are out there fasting, and you're praying, and you think you're so good. You think you're being really religious, but you're missing my heart. You're missing the most important thing. So that's the backdrop to Isaiah 58. He says, you want to know what a real fast is? You want to know what it's really like to follow me? Then here's what you need to do. And that's the backdrop. We start at verse 58 or verse 7 and 8. He says, is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them, and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. And then he says, then, see, when we do this, then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. You see, I really believe that when the church is becoming more relevant through tangibly caring for the poor and the hungry, not only in places like Sudan and Somalia, but in our very backyard, I believe then God's light breaks forth. This is when the kingdom moves. It's like when God says, now I got you where I want you. You're feeding my people. Now let my kingdom come. I'm going to pour it out on you guys, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to protect you. I think that this is one of those things that if we want to be relevant in the world, if we want the church to be relevant in a way that is truly speaking forth truth, but actually changing lives, we've got to care for the poor and feed the hungry. It's an imperative. I don't think this is one of those things that is optional because it's God's heart. And Jesus himself, when he's talking to the disciples, this is really a great thing we need to understand. This is really important. These disciples, these 12 guys that started following Jesus, these guys were a bunch of misfits. They really were. Because in the Jewish culture, what happens is when the kids are small, the parents send their sons to rabbinical school. They send them to the local rabbi. And their hopes And their dreams are that the rabbi will pick my son. And the rabbi will raise up my son to be the town rabbi when he dies. You know, that's kind of the hope, that if you get selected by the rabbi, it's like you just qualified to get a full ride scholarship into Harvard or Yale. That's really what it is. And so these guys all flunked. They didn't make it with the rabbi. So the rabbi said, Peter, James, and John, nice try, but you're just not smart enough. And so go back to your father, learn your father's trade, and you'll follow this guy who I picked to raise up as the next rabbi. And so with that understanding, when Jesus walked up to Peter, when Peter's mending his nets, and Jesus being a great rabbi, teacher, he says, Peter, drop your nets and follow me, bud, and I'll teach you to be fishers of men. That's why Peter dropped his nets. He left everything to follow Jesus because he got picked. He got noticed by the Lord. And so, you know, you think of, I just read Tim Tebow's book. I like these high scholarly kind of readings. And Tim Tebow talked about when he was in high school, he was recognized across the nation as being one of the most promising young quarterbacks. He goes to the University of Florida, gets the Heisman Trophy when he's a sophomore. They win the national championship. Everyone's abuzz about Tim Tebow. And then he gets drafted, and he plays for the Denver Broncos now, and he's the worst quarterback ever that can still win. And he gets all this recognition from the press, you know, all the pundits, they're talking about, he's horrible. He can't hit a side of the barn. But boy, he can win. See, every little boy grows up wanting to be like Tim Tebow. They want to be recognized. They want to be acknowledged. Oh, man, we're so sorry for Grand Junction High School losing the other day. God bless you guys for how you work. But how many of those guys, in their heart, they want to be recognized? They want to be known as the superstar. That's how these disciples were. And so, with that as a backdrop, Jesus tells these guys, hey, you guys, you want to be recognized by God the Father? You want to be known. You want to go out and you want to go into the annals of history, of being people or being men that have made a mark for my kingdom. Then here's how you need to live. And he leaves them with this in Matthew 25. He's talking about when Jesus comes back. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goat. He will put the sheep on his right, and he will put the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Now, wouldn't you love for the Lord to say that to you someday? I hope you do. But then he says, for I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, well, Lord, when did we see you hungry or feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in? Or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And I love Jesus' response. The king will reply, truly, I tell you, when he says truly, he says, this is important, guys. And he said, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Whoa. You see, I am so thankful that it's not being a great theologian, because I wouldn't be included in that crowd. It's not about being all stoic and smug about how religious we are and how good we are and how much gooder we'll be coming. What it's about is having compassion and actually doing something for the poor and the hungry. I remember in Canyon City, we had a guy in our church there that truly, to this day, is probably the smartest guy I've ever met. He was off the charts IQ-wise, and he could just run circles around me when we would start talking about the Bible and theology. But one day I was talking to him, and he had tears in his eyes because we started talking about being a missional people in our church there, which is what I'm talking about now, and of really making an impact in the world by bringing God's compassion to people and sharing the love of Christ with them. And he had a tear kind of come down his eye. This is a guy who has grown up in the church. He worked at Focus on the Family for years. He's homeschooling his kids. He's raising them up in biblical ways. And he said to me, he's 40-something years old. He says, Kirk, I have never led a person to Christ. Guy who's been raised in the church. He was living in such a cocoon world and so isolated from connection relationally with people outside that he literally had never shared the love of Christ with someone and experienced the blessing of having that person receive Christ and see a life transformed. You know what? If that's your story someday, if you've been hanging out here with us for a while, and that's your story, the problem is me. I didn't do a good job coaching you. I didn't exhort you enough to be missional. Because I really do believe that my job as the senior pastor here is to give you vision and give you God's heart and understanding this is what God wants for you, and for you to go out and be a missional person and experience the incredible blessing of seeing a life transformed right before your very eyes. But the even greater thing is what could happen if we as a church community can actually bring cultural change in our whole community. I think that's what God has Canyon View here for. And it's happening, but it can happen more. Because the reality is, the longer we're in church, the less impact we have on the world. What tends to happen is church people hang out with other church people. And so, who are your friends? Who do you relate to? It's all church people. And so we're having actually no impact. And so your jobs, your communities, your neighborhoods, God's calling you to get out of your comfort zones and begin to minister to people that need Jesus. Because you needed Jesus at one time and someone shared him with you, right? And so I believe that Jesus said, don't cover up the lampstand. When you light it, obviously we don't put a shade on top of it and cover it up. You let it shine in the darkness. That's what God wants for us. He wants us to be salt to the earth. He wants us to go into the world and be world changers, every one of us. It's not optional. It's what God commands us to do, and it's what God will empower you and equip you to do if you say, Lord, I'll go. Send me. You see, caring for the poor and the marginalized, I think, is one of the best ways that we can learn God's heart. You know, this Kimwood outreach that we're doing where they take bags of food, literally door to door, and they just say, do you need any food? And a number of the people says, yeah, we could use some food. And they just simply say, is there anything we can pray for you about? If you've never done it, I encourage you to just go show up on Sunday afternoon and go with some of these teams that go in the neighborhood and experience what it's like to have compassion on the poor and to be able to give them something tangible they need, but also to bring the kingdom of God as you love them and pray for them. These people are learning their names. They know their families. They know their stories. It's the church being the church out there. It's an amazing thing. But what happens, the benefit that we learn is we see Jesus in them when we do that. When you minister to people, God just melts your heart, and he gives you compassion for people that are marginalized and for those that are suffering. And I just think it's one of the most important things that we can do, not to be do-good Christians, but to experience Jesus in your life. How are you doing it? What could you do? And so what I want us to understand is that's why we do Convoy of Hope's One Day to Feed the World. If you're new here, you don't know what the fell ball I'm talking about. But Convoy of Hope is a world relief organization. And here's the beauty of us partnering with Convoy of Hope. I love their vision, is they ask churches to do a one day to feed the world. And so what we do with that is we ask you to pray about taking 1 day's wage out of your income. And so just look at how much you make every day and just divide it up, do the math. If you can't do it, ask Jane. She'll help you to do that. I can't. And so then you give it to Convoy of Hope when we do our One Day to Feed the World campaign on December 11th. Now, here's the beauty of it. You give $1 to Convoy of Hope. They take that $1, and because of their corporate connections and corporate sponsors, they're able to literally buy $7 worth of supplies. I don't know about you. I'm not a rocket scientist, but translating $1 into $7 worth of supplies is pretty good math. That's a pretty good margin business-wise, that I would think. Some of you business guys, shake your head up and down, give me support, encourage me. I want to keep going here, okay? So then Convoy of Hope stores all those supplies in their warehouse in Springfield, Missouri. It's a huge warehouse, but they can't keep it full because the amount of natural disasters that have happened in 2011 has been over the top. So then, when there's a natural disaster in an area, whether it's in the U.S. or around the world, here's the beauty of this, and I love this. They'll send containers to that area, and who do they give it to resource the areas, the community? The church. So, if by some tragedy a natural disaster happened in Grand Junction, Convoy of Hope would ship supplies to Canyon View, and you would take the supplies and service the community and bring the love of Christ to them. And they're seeing God move in amazing ways. Isn't that great? So that's the beauty. That's why I love partnering with Convoy of Hope, and we're going to do this on December 11th. So just pray and ask the Lord how he would want you to be involved with that. We obviously have the backpack program. If any of you would like to volunteer, or if you'd like to give donations to the food bank to supply the food for us for the backpacks, you can do that. Now, here's a big thing. This is cool. The food bank is who we get the food from to take food to the community in Kimwood Park area. We are using about $300 of food a weekend to feed about 200 families in that area. Now, here's what the food bank does. If a volunteer from Canyon View goes to the food bank and you give 3 hours of continuous time of volunteering there, and there's various things they'll have you do, they will credit Canyon View with $20 worth of supplies that we can use every week for the outreach at Kimwood. So what that means is if we get more people from here that have time, because this is a great thing. This is a way you can be involved. You may not have the money to give to Canyon View. Maybe you have time. And so you can go to the food bank and you can volunteer 3 hours a week, give us $20 more food that we can feed more families that we reach out to in Kimwood. It's a great thing, isn't it? So if you want to be involved in that, just contact the food bank and say, I'd like to volunteer for Canyon View, because my really good-looking pastor, Pastor Kirk, said to go do that. Now, this is something that I want us to grab hold of, this vision for the future. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about hydroponics and erase that. That was my past life, talking about that. I want you to see his picture from here. This was an aquaponics tank. Now, see the good-looking guy, Rick Kanegi there? He is the brainchild of this thing, and he found out about this, and he went to a conference to learn about this, and this is ingenious. And I tell you, this is something that I am stoked over. I think God is going to be all over this with worldwide implications for us here at Canyon View, okay? Because we're talking about the issue of feeding the hungry. Now, this is really in general terms, okay? I'm not an expert on this, but this is from what I understand. Now, down here, we have the fish tank. That bottom tank is full of water and fish. Now, fish are like humans. They do stuff. And as they do stuff, it gets in the water, right? Are you carrying my drift? Yeah. If you don't understand, go home and ask your mom. She'll explain it to you. Now, as that gets into the water, now there's a pump down here in the tank, and it feeds up water from the fish tank, and it drops into this tank up above. It could be tanks on the side, whatever. In this tank, we have in here, it's all full of pea gravel. And so the water level will rise up to a certain point, and in the pea gravel, now we have lettuce planted. Those are Kirk's artistic lettuce things. Okay? So, here's the beauty of this. It creates a symbiotic environment. That's a pretty big term. Are you impressed with me using that? Wow. Don't ask for anything more. Now, the water that's pumped up from the fish tank has nutrients from the fish's stuff that gives it nitrates and stuff for the plants. It feeds the plants. And the water in there allows the roots of the plants to have a continuous flow of water to nourish the plants. So the plants grow almost twice as fast as being out in a garden. And the plants in the gravel filter out the stuff from the fish. And so when the water level rises to a certain level, it flushes down back into the tank. And it's clean water going back into the tank. So it just continues to flow. Now, what would happen if we take this aquaponics technology to a pastor that's planting a church in southern Sudan, and he's working in a village that is impoverished and hungry, and we send in someone that's been trained in aquaponics, and we build an aquaponics community in that village using solar power and so forth, and the village can eat protein from the fish and produce from the vegetables that are grown in the aquaponics tank. It can be a self-sustaining ability for the pastor to not only bring the gospel to the community, but to feed them, and to even provide a means for them to possibly make money as they sell the produce. Now, see, that's why I'm so excited, because I think what Rick has tapped into here, sure, it can feed some of us that if we want, we can make an aquaponics tank in our garage. That's doable, and later when he gets it down, he's actually going to have a school that you can come and learn how to do this. And by the way, eating protein and produce that you grow holistically and organically like this will help you to become healthy. Okay? But we need to take this to the world. We need to feed people as well as bring them the gospel. I'm so excited. This is God's heart. It's what he calls us to do, and we can impact the world through taking things like this to them. That is, to me, the hottest thing I've ever seen. As you can tell, I'm excited about this because I really do believe it's God's heart. And the implications that we're going to see, I think we can't even imagine. So, as we talked about Convoy of Hope, I want you to watch this video of this little guy. This is from Convoy. And hear his story of how we're impacting his life there. Let's watch this video.